Welcome, everybody. My name is Kelly Mand, and I am the Director of Programs with A Time to Heal. And I just want to thank you guys for joining us today. So I did want to remind everybody that as part of our session today, we will be doing a drawing where 4 of our attendees are going to receive a free children or teen workbook that is authored by our speaker. So we will do that drawing towards the end of our session today, so stay tuned. Can everybody see? Are you guys seeing a title sponsor screen? Yep. Okay. So before we get started, I just want to thank our sponsor. All of our Create Your Best Life events are sponsored by Nebraska Cancer Specialists. If you have more questions or want to explore what Nebraska Cancer Specialist does, you can visit their website at nebraskacancer.com. And so without further ado, joining us today, we have Pam Ganz, and she received her undergraduate degree in child development from Connecticut College, and she received her child life certificate from the Johns Hopkins Hospital. She continued her studies at the University of Nebraska, where she received a Master's of Science degree in Family Rehabilitation and Counseling Psychology, focusing on the psychosocial impact of a cancer diagnosis. She worked at Children's Hospital in Phoenix at the Children's Cancer Center before returning to Nebraska, where she has continued her work in family center programming at various organizations. So she is, we are very thankful to have her today, and she's a very great expert on this topic. So thanks for joining us today, Pam.
Well, thank you so much for that, Kelly. Well, good morning to all of you. I appreciate you coming this morning and joining in. I love these kind of experiences and sharing what I know, and I hope that it does cover some of your concerns and questions. But I really do want to thank Kelly and A Time to Heal for inviting me to participate this morning. So as she said, I'll share some things that I know and that I have found to be important, but you all are the ones that have your own experiences and your own children, and will be just a dialogue as we go on. You can go ahead and take this one down if you want. And I guess I just really first want to talk about that in the, oh, we don't need any screen up now. It can just be me for now if you want. But in the past 40 years, I've worked with kids in various settings, first in pediatric oncology, then at grief centers, and then in different group experiences, children who are experiencing a cancer diagnosis of a parent or family member. And really through all those experiences with kids, early on, I learned 2 really important and enduring lessons that really never have changed in any of those settings. And that's that it was evident to me that children and teens have 2 basic needs. They need to understand and they need to be understood. It's really vital that children have these 2 things to be able to cope with serious illness. And it's those 2 needs that led me to write workbooks and journals for those kids, because they just need an outlet to help them understand what's going on and also be understood. The second lesson that I learned was that kids are just amazingly resilient, which is part of the reason why I've loved working with kids all these years. I'm just so amazed and inspired by kids' resilience in some really challenging situations. And because these lessons are so important, I videotaped 4 young adults who all they had a parent or a grandparent diagnosed with cancer when they were young kids. And Kelly will share that later on. And you'll hear from these just remarkable young adults, and through their own words, you'll hear why there was such value for them in understanding what was happening, the importance of them being understood by the people they love, and then their ability to grow into really amazing, resilient young adults. You saw the slide with the elephant. The reason why I call this the elephant in the room is that it can be really tough to discuss uncomfortable subjects. So how can we shrink the elephant to a smaller size? Sometimes you can't make it go away entirely, right? But you want to shrink it. And the answer of how you do that is through communicating effectively, which is also that first step in understanding one another. I'm guessing since you've chosen to spend a Saturday and some time with me today, my guess is that you're concerned about how the disease and its treatment will affect your family and maybe looking for ways to tackle those difficult conversations. If that's true, I can tell you that often the top priority for parents, even though you're going through so much yourself, is to limit both those short and long-term effects of the illness on your children. But first off, I want you to know that although a cancer diagnosis obviously will affect your family and your concerns are real, there is plenty of room for optimism when it comes to your kids. Resilience is a phenomenon that can only be used or can only be considered within the context of adversity. And, your family is smack dab in a really challenging life event right now. But in my experience of working with kids over the years, is that these kids just often turn out to be the most amazing
I'm in a Zoom
adults.
meeting for an hour.
Um, and
And
these kids
cancer
become
support.
amazing adults who are wise, they have solid coping skills, solid priorities, and they know how to persevere in adversity. Great qualities we can all use anytime in life. And the other thing I've noticed with these kids that makes them so special, they really have a caring heart and a concern for other people that not all kids do, right? Um, so I want to spend a moment talking about resilience because good communication fosters resilience in kids. I want you to know that what seems like a challenge can become an opportunity to teach children how to cope with difficult situations and life events. With the help of supportive adults, learning to manage stress can promote growth. It helps children just become better equipped to cope with life's obstacles and hardships down the road because, as we all know, life throws a lot of curveballs over a lifetime. But the good news is that resilient skills can be learned, and the brain and other biological systems are most adaptable early in life. So kids have that leg up, we can still do that too, but kids really have a great ability to do that. You can go ahead and put that next slide up now, Kelly, thanks. So there are three crucial things that influence resilience in kids. I'm really just going to talk about those top two because those have more to do with effective communication between a child and adult, but the bottom one is important, obviously. So that top one, the supportive adult-child relationships, that just really means that kids need to know they're not alone. A supportive relationship, it means having a parent's trust and support. And that includes listening, trying to understand, validating feelings, and answering questions. A supportive relationship should leave kids saying, I'm not alone, I'm supported and understood. And in addition, children and teens just need to feel like they can talk about the illness. The second one is that build a sense of self-efficacy and perceived control. It's really about coping skills and how to deal with emotions. It's about learning to name an emotion, know ways to express that emotion, having feelings validated, and knowing that feelings are feelings. They're neither right or wrong. Kids should ideally be able to say, I have ways to express what I'm going through, and I can learn healthy ways to handle my emotions. You can go ahead to the next slide. So this is a page from my book for younger children. So I think it's important to know that kids can have positive growth from difficult situations. And so I have pages in both books that address that phenomenon. And of course, their answers will change over time as they mature and develop and gain some perspective. But I want you all to know that kids really do have some good things that come out of a very difficult situation. You can go to the next slide. Now in the book for teens, you can see that a lot more things. But these are all things that kids have shared with me in support groups over the years. So I didn't just make these up on my own. And I hope that too gives you just an idea of what your kids can gain from this difficult situation. You can go ahead and take that down. So how do we begin the task? And we don't need that slide up yet. It'll just be me. Have to look at my face a little bit. How do we begin the task of helping children build that resilience and cope with the illness? Well, the answer is communication. And I do want to take a brief moment. I don't want to feel like I'm, teaching a class, but I just want to highlight some of the developmental characteristics to consider, because it really is helpful knowledge that provides an understanding of the world from a child or teen's perspective. And even if you have young kids, you do want to kind of know what that looks like when they're a teenager or an older age, because the interesting thing about this is that kids reprocess and deal with the illness as they mature and develop. So even if it's been years since you were first diagnosed, you might not think that as a teen, they're going to revisit some things that you've already talked about. So you'll get the handouts. I won't spend too much time on this, but it'll kind of be some helpful knowledge. Okay, you can go ahead to the next. So we've got babies and toddlers. And I think the important thing here is that sometimes people think they're so young, they will have no idea what's going on. But children do sense change in routine, and they do sense tension and such. So routine is really important. And when there is a change in routine, children they might cry more, there might be more temper tantrums, there could be some behavioral changes, and that separation anxiety might really increase. So there's some things there just to think about. Now, preschool, they do have a concept of illness, and that'll come into play when you think about how to talk about things with that age group. But the thing in this age group is that big imagination, and they do have very big imaginations. And they are egocentric. They're the center of the universe, which means kids that age aren't really able to empathize. They might seem like they do. They might say to you, if you're crying, oh, mommy's sad, but they might be jumping on the bed and giggling. There's just going to be that disconnect. The other big thing that's important at that age is that magical thinking. It's kind of a cartoon reality where characters have superpowers and characters are indestructible. That play is important. You might think about medical kits, gathering things where they can. That play is how kids deal with things at that age because they don't have the words. So giving them opportunities with dolls or medical kits, any dramatic plays, kids really do enjoy that, and that's how they cope. We can go to the next slide. So now we're in early elementary, and they're becoming a little bit more cognitively prepared to express ideas, but they have difficulty understanding why, because unfairness is a concept that they now understand and they struggle with. That often feel they're to blame. I'm going to talk about that later because that is true for several age groups. Late elementary, some important points here is that misinformation about cancer. They're on social media a little bit more, especially in this day and age. And they think that their friends are an accurate source of information. And we all know that kids that age, they are not the expert of all things. Activities are important because at that age, their identity kind of centers around those things. And that comes into play in trying to keep them in their normal activities. They're interested in cause and effect, and that kind of leads to them, they're going to be more interested in facts about the disease. Not all kids, but some kids, because they can understand sort of that basic biology of what causes illness and the effects of the disease. Let's move on to the older kids. So middle school, that top one, that tell me how you're feeling, that might work with your younger child, but with middle school kids, you're going to get that look, and we all know that look, right? Of that 13-year-old. And the important thing here is kids do think about life and death more. You might get those questions with younger kids, but this age, kids are just cognitively at a different place. So they think about more complex and philosophical issues. Those rules and limits are important because when some of those rules and limits are thrown out of the window, that makes kids anxious, and kids interpret that as things must be worse than I thought, because now they don't seem to care what time I come in. They're letting me do what I want. Peers are really becoming important at this age. So they may not talk to you as much. They do turn to peers for support. And that fun one that we love, emotions are intensified by puberty. In high school, there really is a tendency to protect parents, and high schoolers might clam up. And part of that is because at this age, they also try to protect their parents. They don't want to add to your burdens. They're way more aware of the stress and what the illness brings to a family. So they turn to their peers more for support. It doesn't mean they don't care. It doesn't mean they're not talking to anybody about things. That's just kind of that age. Honesty is important throughout all of this, but with high school kids, honesty is just crucially important. Their needs are important. They're self-centered, just like those little kids, where they think the world revolves around them. The one I think thing to really watch out for is that kids sometimes as they assume the caregiver role. And it's kind of a trap. Well, I'll talk about that a little later, but it's something that you want to try to avoid if you can. Kids are future oriented at this age, so they might make decisions based on your illness. Maybe they were thinking about moving to another state or going to school in another state, and that gets complicated because of a sick parent, because they're not sure if they should or can. Let's go to the next slide. So a zillion questions, right? So let's start with the why. Why is communication so important? And you can go ahead. We don't need a slide up now. So children can only cope if they have accurate information, right? Like us, how do we even know how to begin to cope with something if we don't even know what's going on? And not communicating is communicating something. Think about that for a second. If you decide not to talk to your children about what's really going on, without realizing it, you're communicating that the illness is too scary to talk about. And that just increases anxiety. And it kind of inadvertently is implying that neither you nor they are up to coping with the situation. Kids need to understand that even in a challenging time, people can rise to the occasion and develop the strength to cope with difficulties. That kind of goes back to that teaching resilience. And if you don't talk about things that puts additional strain on you and others to keep everything a secret. Let's go to the next slide. And next one after that. So I've always loved this one. When I asked my dad where babies come from, he told me the Cabbage Patch. I went out in the garden a lot that summer looking for a little bro or sis. My mom had to explain to me, Dad's a liar. So, and you can take that one down now, but not telling children what's happening makes it really difficult for your children to trust what you say once they do learn about the illness. And they most likely will learn the truth or some version of the truth. Sometimes they hear things from well-meaning relatives. Sometimes it can be a teacher or a parent of one of their friends. I think sometimes we give kids too little credit for being the effective little detectives that they are. Eventually, they do figure it out because they sense the tension, they hear hushed conversations, and they can tell when you've been crying, even when we think we're clever by just crying in the shower. Um, and the problem is that problems arise in the absence of accurate information because in the meantime, kids will often fill in the blanks with wrong conclusions. And sometimes their imaginations conjure up far more terrible possibilities, at least in their mind, than a cancer diagnosis. And honestly, that really is true across the age span from young kids through to teens. I've had kids in support groups, they were relieved when their parent finally told them it was cancer. They just knew something was wrong. Nobody was talking about it. They thought that maybe they were moving or one of their parents lost a job or other things that to them seemed worse than hearing, your father has cancer. And most importantly, though, you just don't want to jeopardize them having trust in you because once that's damaged, it's really difficult to reestablish that trust. And also think about once you tackle discussing the subject of illness, it really will strengthen discussions about other difficult things later on, about anything. If you're the ones to share the news first before they hear it from someone else or begin to try to fill in the blanks on their own, they really will get a more accurate and hopeful picture of the situation. Especially in this day and age, in the absence of accurate and honest communication from parents, older kids especially will be searching the internet for information. And I'll talk about that a little later. We can go to the next slide. So, when we're on flights, we've all heard this, put on the oxygen mask before we assist kids. So on that one, I would say don't have difficult conversations when you're upset, when you're tired, if you're pressed for time, particularly discouraged, or feeling especially sick. And you can take that down now, it'll just be me. And I'd say likewise, the same goes for your kids. Don't have the difficult conversations when that stuff is going on. Or if your child is hungry, we all know that's never a good time to talk. But you can delay telling kids until you feel emotionally stronger, but it's also okay to ask for help. Your partner can help share the news, or a second person, such as a different family member or close friend, can lead the conversation. Don't feel like you have to be the one to do all the sharing or all the talking. You can go ahead and take that one down and, don't go to the next one yet. So we're going to talk about the who. Um, I'm sorry. We can take that one down for just a sec. So the point is, you'll want to be the one to decide who will be present and who will lead the conversation, just you or some other adult support. Because you're the expert on your own children, then you decide, do I talk to them individually or as a group? The thing I would say about talking to your kids as a group is that it kind of is best to group for ages, because it's a very different conversation if it's a 6-year-old or a 16-year-old. You could have a simple conversation with them as a group, but it will be different. Their needs are different. And then, the style of communication is different. You might have a 9-year-old who is an incredibly nosy kid and wants to know every little detail. Why? Tell me this. And how does this medicine work? And you might have an older child who's kind of like, I just want to know, how's this going to affect me? And they may not even care to hear all the details about the medical side of things. And then there's the how. How do we communicate about difficult conversations and topics in the most effective way? So the thing I would say, number one, remember, there's no perfect way to have these conversations. It's not a situation that comes naturally and easily with a perfect set of instructions. So you want to combine your instincts with knowledge. And number two, the most important thing is by practicing good listening skills. Okay, you can go ahead to the next slide.
Pam, we did receive a question in advance,
Oh,
and I'm not sure if it's on topic of kind of what you're saying about, enlisting other people, if that's, appropriate for your situation. But the question that we received, and just let me know if you're going to touch on this later. It says, how does the relationship between the child and the person with the diagnosis affect that conversation? So when talking with them, if it's a parent or maybe another caregiver or maybe a extended family, how does that relationship affect that conversation? If you're able to speak on that.
well, I think it really goes back of what is the child asking? What is the child wanting to know? And the child needs to feel like they're with someone safe, that they can ask the questions. And it may not be the parent. It may be the grandparent. It might be their aunt. It's whoever that the child feels that they can comfortably ask questions and that somebody will give them honest answers. The worst thing is for kids to feel like someone is not being straight with them. So I don't know if it's as much about the relationship, if it's the parent, if it's the grandparent. It's more about what the child wants to know
Hmm.
and having an adult that they can talk to. Yeah.
Thanks, Pam.
Oh, sure, of course. So, whether we have a cat, a dog, a hamster, whatever it is, we love talking to our pets, right? And think about, why is that? Why do they know everything about what we're scared about or worried about? It's because they don't talk back, right? They just listen. And I would say, excuse me, the most important tool of communication is listening. And when you look at those things, none of us enjoy being interrupted or interpreting or judged. So neither do kids. And the most important recommendation really for tackling the tough subjects and communicating with kids in general is listening. It's not as much about what you say or having these expert speaking skills as it is just about your listening skills. I would say, and you can go ahead and take it down if you want, remember not to pass judgment and let your kids finish their thoughts. Please make it clear that their reactions and fears won't be judged or questioned. Even if we think something sounds unrealistic or silly, and believe me, there will be things like that, it's really important that we don't share that view with them because whatever they're feeling is real to them. So instead of saying that's crazy or don't think that way, it's much better to say, I can see why you might think that way, or tell me more about why you think that, because nothing shuts a conversation down quicker when you are implying or saying that what they're saying is stupid. You can follow up with what are some things that might be helpful when you feel that way, or let's figure this out together. That opens up a completely different scenario than saying that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, right? Um, Kids need to know they have a safe space to express their concerns and feelings and questions. And going back to what Kelly just, that one question, whatever that safe space is and whoever that person is that they feel like they can ask anything, maybe it will be the parent, but don't worry if it's not you. The point is that they do have someone that they can express their concerns. We can go to the next slide, and you'll have all these. Kelly's going to share all these. And so I'm not going to really go through a lot of them. You can just sort of look at those now. Number 4, I really do like. I've used that a lot. That if you don't know the answer, to just say that's a good question, but I don't know the answer, and I'll find out for both of us, because you don't need to pretend you're the expert on everything either. But the nice thing about that is that it buys you time, because kids can ask some really tough questions. So if it's a question that you do know the answer, but you're not really quite ready, that buys you some time to say that or to answer that. That last one is really important. Just stick with what your child wants to know. I think probably the biggest mistake that adults make is oversharing. Like once you get into it, the child really might, when they're asking you how chemo works, maybe they really just want to know that it's going into your vein or your port or whatever. Maybe they don't want to know every little detail. So you can always just defer back to what do you want to know? And then you avoid that trap of just oversharing and giving them overload. We can go to the next one.
Pam, I did get a question
Oh,
that's sort of on topic with number 3 to an extent, but the question, and I'm not sure if you have experience working with this population, but it says that the question asked was, how do you talk to your child or kid about that has a developmental disability about cancer? And so obviously sharing it at their developmental stage, but then this question specifically was about their treatment is over. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or any tips to consider in those conversations.
well, if treatment is over, then, really focusing more, are you still experiencing effects from the treatment? Because what kids do understand is maybe you're tired. Maybe there's still some pain. Maybe you still have doctor visits. So I would say focus on what the child is seeing. What is still going on that might affect the child's life. So it's okay to say, I'm still tired because I still don't feel well, or really just focusing on whatever the symptom, whatever the child is seeing that might be different for them. It doesn't have to be a complex explanation. Again, it goes back to kids knowing how it will affect them. So if I'm tired, maybe I'm going to nap more. Maybe I won't be able to run around and play. Mommy's not feeling that great right now. It doesn't necessarily have to be all about explaining cancer to the child. I don't know, does that help?
Yeah, I think that's good. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Um, and then on this one, I'd say number 8 is just really important. I'll talk about that a little later, that it's providing assurance that kids will be taken care of no matter what. And that number 9, asking your child that kind of provides an opportunity to calm fears and give them solutions. Because what we think or how it's affecting us is different than it's affecting them, and things that we might think matters to kids might not be what is mattering to them. And that 10, even if your child doesn't bring up a particular subject, you can anyway. And you can do it in a way that you can say, I read, or when I was getting treatment, there was another person who was saying that sometimes kids worry that something they did or didn't do caused the cancer diagnosis. And you can talk about it. They might not have asked it, but if it's something that you want them to know, or you might think that they're worried about, they will have heard it. They might not say anything more about it, but it's out there. So you can kind of communicate with kids in that way, even if they're not bringing up a particular subject. Just like we were talking about, you can say, this mom that I was sitting next to at treatment, or this dad was saying it really is hard for their child because they don't have the energy to do some of the things they were doing. And your child might pick up on that. They might take that bite and say something, and they might not. But in any case, you can put it out there in that way. Let's go to the next one, because I know you guys will have these slides. So
Thanks, Pam. And I know we'll have these as a resource, like Pam said afterwards, but we did receive a few questions, Pam, about a little bit about number 6, children who aren't interested. Most of the questions that I received were about teens. I don't know if you want to chat on that now or at a future slide. But I can share some of the questions if that would be helpful.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So one of the questions was, what's the best way to bring up cancer post-treatment, on how things are going with a teen that won't talk? So you did talk about that a little bit earlier, but if you could just speak on that again.
Well, I think the main thing here is, everyone wants life to be back to normal. The person with cancer, the spouse. I mean, it's just, that's a hard thing for everybody, because life isn't ever going to be exactly how it was. But teens really just want life back to normal. Remember, they are very self-centered. So you can talk about, you would like life to be normal too, and how it was, but you can talk about how you still have some of the effects of cancer. Yes, you might not be in the active phase of treatment, but you can ask them, is there anything that is still difficult for you about this? How you can ask your teenager, how much or how little do you want me to share about where things are now? And it's might be that need to know basis for them, but it gives them the opportunity to say, do they want you to share what is happening still, even though you may not be in active treatment? Do they want to know how the effects of the illness, how some might linger, and how you feel on a particular day? But remember, if they're not talking to you, it doesn't mean they're not talking about it to someone. In high school, my son's best friend, his mom had cancer, and Ryan wasn't talking about it with anyone, but he would talk about it when he was over here. And his mom knew that, and it was, I think, comforting for her to know that he did have somewhere or someone he could talk to about it. again, teens are trying to protect their parents. It's kind of a certain phenomenon at that age. And it appears as if they don't care, but it doesn't mean that they really do not care. It's just they don't want to talk to their parent about it. Um, and again, you can say, maybe they don't want to hear it, but they'll hear it if you say, just to keep you in the loop, or by the way, um, and then you can tell them the information that you think is pertinent to them. It's about how it's going to affect their life. That's mostly what they really care about at that age. So if you aren't able to like go to their football game, you can say, just to keep you informed, I am experiencing fatigue because X, Y, and Z. They may not want to respond or hear it, but they will have heard it. They just may not want to further discuss it. Does that kind of answer that, do you think, for now?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I did receive a question in the chat, and then it kind of correlates with some that I received in advance, just about, planning for the future, planning for perhaps worst case scenario. Do you want me to ask that now, Pam, or is there another slide that would be more appropriate for those discussions?
Well, I mean, I think, and I will talk about this when it gets a little further on. So, but for now, I would say share good news as often as possible. But you have to be honest as if it is a bad day and you can't do the things that you want. I think kids need to know that they can ask for updates anytime. And it's that wanting an update that helps them know that cancer is kind of constantly evolving and changing. Um, I think I will talk about that maybe as we get a little bit further on, because that is something that kids do need to
Yeah.
know about. On this one, this is that I talked about this a little earlier about Googling information. Um, assure kids that you will be the source of accurate and current information. They need to trust that you will be. Older children, even still, might want to just become more educated, which is fine, but direct them to known and trusted websites. Usually, whatever hospital you're getting treatment at, hospitals have excellent websites. There's National Institutes of Health, American Cancer Society. If you let them know what accurate sources there are out there, it kind of can preempt them just randomly Googling things. And remember, they're going to hear things from friends too, of all kinds of things they think their parent or grandparent should be doing. But you can help direct them to correct sites. Let your kids know that they're not alone and other kids have dealt with this current situation, because there are likely kids in their class that are currently going through or have gone through something similar. By the age of 21, 1 in 15 kids will have had a parent with a cancer diagnosis. So it is not so uncommon as your child may think. Remember, kids always feel like no one else is going through this. This is just them. They'll have these slides. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So this kind of deals with that answer of what, and these allow kids to identify questions they're curious about. And it also helps you tailor your answers to what they want to know. Again, what you think they might want to know might not be what they want to know. You can go ahead to the next slide. So as you can see, the older the kids, the more complex the questions. Again, these are questions that teens have asked and that I've heard. So I recommend thinking about how to answer some of the possible questions brewing in their heads, because it is helpful to prepare yourself beforehand about some of these questions, because these are common questions that kids, these especially like 12 and older, that kids will ask. But there are certainly plenty of curious, bright kids that will all also ask these questions. And you go ahead and take that slide down. Be prepared for that question. Are you going to die? Kids, young kids ask this, older kids ask this, but be prepared for the question so that you're not caught off guard. You can say, yes, sometimes people do die from cancer because it's likely that they do know someone that has, a grandparent or somebody else's relative. So depending on their age, their questions will differ. I will tell you there are great resources out there. In Lincoln, Nebraska, our Children's Grief Center is Morning Hope. I know in Omaha, you have Centering Corporation. I would use those places as resources because they have a lot on anticipatory grief. And wherever it is that you live, those are excellent, excellent places for resources. But it is a question that they are going to ask, and you might have to differentiate between people in their lives that have died of cancer and your situation. It's good to reiterate that cancer is not the same for everybody, but in the end, always remember that you will tell them how you're doing, and they can ask questions and share their concerns with you at any time. You go ahead and go to the next slide.
And Pam,
Oh, sure.
I'll ask this question now. It says, it was submitted to me today. It says, my boys are 8 and 10, and I am a full-time single mother, 100% custody. This person has treatable but not curable cancer. And so the boys, it says, I've insured my boys that I'm not dying, and they are obviously worried that what will happen if I do. The question is, how much should I bring them in and let them be part of the planning process for worst case scenario?
Well, as I said, kids at any age, and I'll talk about this even more, they need to be reassured that they'll be taken care of no matter what. Very real fear for kids, and they worry about that. So I think again, it's asking them, what is it that scares you the most? What is it that worries you? Because that's how you can find out where they're at in their head. You might think, oh, and we're not quite, we'll go to that garden slide. But I will get to, this current question is a very important one. So I'll go into detail in that in just a sec, if that's okay. We'll just get through this part really quick. I'm assuming everybody there today has already had to explain the cancer diagnosis to kids, but it's really essential for young kids to differentiate between being sick and your illness, and between medicine and chemotherapy, because kids have those big imaginations. So it's important they understand that a cold or stomach ache is much different than a cancer diagnosis, as is taking cough medicine versus chemotherapy. That's why naming the illness and treatment can be important. And this is so true. If you refer to a tumor as a bump, guess what your kids are going to think next time they get a bump after a fall? And that goes to their imaginations. And I know sometimes it feels hard to name an illness, but kids fill in the blanks with some really weird truths of their own. For younger kids, explaining what cancer is and how treatment works can be difficult. And maybe this diagnosis explaining in this way would also be good for a child with developmental disabilities. You want to just give an explanation that suits where they're at. But always for me, with younger kids, the analogy of weeds growing in a garden was a very simple way for kids to understand. Weeds multiply and they grow quickly. Eventually, they might crowd out your beautiful vegetables or your beautiful flowers, so that they have to be removed by picking them, which is kind of like surgery, or sprayed with a substance that will get rid of the weeds. It also might do some damage to some of the pretty flowers or to that great parsley you have growing. And that's very similar to how chemotherapy and radiation works, that also some of the good cells are destroyed. And that's why you might lose your hair or be sick to your stomach. Um, and I'm sure you guys have some other ways that have worked wonderfully for you, but this has been a really tried and true one. I'm so old that early days Pac-Man worked as a great explanation as well. The other important thing is that dispelling myths and misconceptions. You can go ahead and take that down. Some other important subjects to talk about is what's the treatment plan? Will it involve being away from home? How are you going to feel? You want to prepare them for physical changes. You don't want them to be surprised when one day you have hair, one day you don't. There can be major surgeries. Kids at any age might want to accompany you to an appointment, but always, always prepare them ahead of time for what they're going to see. And use your instincts and judgment, knowing the personalities of your kids. Again, you might have a 9-year-old who is fascinated by the IVs and in that environment in a treatment room, and you might have a 12-year-old who just gets sick at the thought of a needle. But it's always nice for them to have that opportunity if they do want to go. Again, what they're thinking in their head is often sometimes very different than the reality. Going back to teens, they might be worried but afraid to upset you by asking questions. The rule of thumb, always with kids, give them as much or as little information as they desire, while always assuring that you'll give them honest honest answers. Some of the big myths and misconceptions is that cancer is contagious. I'm always surprised by that at every age, that still is out there. But the big one is that you didn't get cancer because of something bad you or your child did or thought. And unfortunately, younger children sometimes believe people get sick as a punishment, or that the stress of being a parent caused you to get sick. And remember, back to those developmental ages, kids under or around 8 have that magical thinking. And they really do believe something that they did or even said is the reason. I've heard things like this many times in my career. When I was playing with Daddy, I jumped on his stomach and I gave him cancer. That caused his cancer. It is amazing what kids think. So we can now go to that next slide on worries. So these are pages that provide a way for kids and teens to express their concerns, and it gives you a heads up on things that your kids might worry about. Again, it might be things that really surprise you, and their worries can be anything from being in school and being afraid they're going to start crying because they're worrying about you, or it might be something totally unrelated to the illness. You just never know. Remember, kids are still kids and they worry about kid things like failing an exam. You go ahead, go to the next one. Now, teens have more complicated and more intellectually complex worries, and you can see what those are. Again, these are things you might cover if you have a sense that your teen might be thinking about these things. And guilt is a really big emotion that kids feel. And even at that age, they can feel that they somehow attributed to the cancer diagnosis. But some of those things on there, kids do feel guilty about going out or joking with their family. It's important just to be aware of some of the things that kids think about. You can go ahead and take that down. So what kids are thinking is, how is this going to affect me? And what's the plan for dealing with the changes? While it might seem self-centered, it's entirely normal for kids to mostly seem to care about how the illness will affect them directly. It's just who they are. So provide them with answers of who is going to help out if you're not feeling up to something. Maybe Aunt Karen will take you to your violin lesson or soccer practice. Whatever it is, the main goal is to keep your children in the loop so that they aren't constantly surprised at every turn by a sudden change in routine or by too many sudden changes in plans. That makes them feel very insecure. I know that some parents have found it helpful to create a calendar so that as much as possible, you can communicate what will be happening, and your child will have this visual to remind them that their needs are being considered and covered as best you can. Um, and it goes back to kids residing in that "what about me" reality. They really do need that reassurance that they'll be taken care of no matter what, from the very simple "who's going to take me to swim practice" to what will happen if you need a lengthy hospital stay, or what if you won't survive the disease. Be prepared to answer these questions that might arise, and then just keep them tailored to the situation at hand, and asking them what worries you most about if this happened, because then you know how to answer and direct your answer to their question at hand. And of course, although you might try your very best to maintain routines, change is just inevitable. Keep whatever your expectations were before you had the diagnosis of your kids. Um, it's fine to keep those same expectations. And it's also okay to let them know you might need a little help sometimes, especially from teens who drive. But remember that kids still need to be kids, and they can't suddenly turn into little adults. Find out what changes are most difficult for them and discuss them and try to find solutions that might lessen the impact. You can ask kids how they would like to help out, because kids do enjoy feeling like they're contributing and helping in some way, right? We all feel really helpless in a situation like that, but sometimes it can just be something little that you ask your kids to do and they feel like they're needed and they're helping. Um, Again, though, aim for that balance between asking your kids to help out, but letting them be that 8 or 18-year-old that they are. Older kids especially might feel like they have to stay home and take care of you, or that they need to assume the role of a parent, but let them know they're not responsible for you and your other kids. They need to keep up with school, friends, activities. Let's go to the next slide. I hope I'm okay on time. This is just, oh, I see we are, okay, I'm not great on time. Well, I'll try to go through quickly. This is about creating empathy and understanding. And, honesty is a two-way street. Parents can't meet their kids' needs if they aren't honest about what they feel or need. And as much as we might want to be, or kids think we are, we're just not mind readers. I always find it interesting, these kinds of things, this kind of page, because how we think someone is reacting isn't necessarily what they're thinking. We'll go to the next. Hindsight is 20/20, right? And I hope that what I've shared so far has been helpful and informative, but there really is no wisdom like those who have personally experienced something difficult and survived the adversity. You can go ahead and take this down for now. So I want to end by sharing the wisdom of these young adults who have experienced someone they love going through cancer. And I hope that their stories and their words will give you hope and help you communicate with the children you love as you go through this experience together. About a 14-minute video, I think. But yeah, you go ahead and start the video, Kelly.
Thanks, Pam. I'll go ahead and start this video, and then afterwards we'll do that quick drawing and we'll close up. I do know that, and we're good on time, Pam, but I do know that there were a couple questions about some resources. Some people asked a couple specific questions about videos for 10-year-olds or around there. And so what we'll do is we'll follow up this week with some resources. Pam and I will connect. She has a couple resources that she wants to share. So just know that those resources will be coming to your email later this week, but we'll go ahead and watch the video and then we'll close up after that.
My name is David. I'm 24 years old, and my father was diagnosed with neuroblastoma, brain cancer, when I was 6 months old. So if I have any advice to parents who are going through cancer treatment and trying to figure out how to include their children, it would be, one, to gauge the level of inquisitiveness that their kid has. If their kid is asking tons of questions, if they seem like they want to be part of it, if they are expressing a desire to understand whatever limited vocabulary or understanding of mortality and disease they have. But if that want is there, to find a way to foster it. It's never going to be perfect because kids can't understand often, the intricacies and complexities of a disease. Even adults struggle with that in dramatic ways. But if that desire is there, I think it should be fed. And for me, it was one of the most empowering and comforting things for me to ask a question and to feel like I was getting a real answer, both from my mom and dad, to not feel like I was being condescended to not feel like they were trying to make the situation seem like it was better than it was. He and my mother did a great job at saying, this is rare, this does happen, but it's not going to necessarily happen to you. But say things like, this is what is happening to daddy. It's not what's happening to everybody else. You don't need to be afraid that this is going to be your life too. And this does not mean that you are him. And that was also very important. So I used the workbook, which is called Life Isn't Always a Day at the Beach. And my main memory of it is that it created a visual component for what I was going through. The workbook was huge for that. And my mom and dad sent for a huge number of resources. And this was one that we did together and that I remember was incredibly important in developing some of the language that we used, in thinking about how to talk about the disease. And that I believe they had actually done together before they shared with me, and they got several copies of it. So they had their own idea of what it could offer. So I remember that they already were very literate in what I was reading and what I was doing, and that it didn't feel like they were just giving me something to make me feel better. It felt like we were all doing it together and that they were guiding me through it. So I guess that's a piece of advice too, is that if you're using a workbook, if you're using a resource, to make it a team activity and a family activity. It was something that we were confronting together, and that they were going to both listen to what I wrote in the workbook and how I contextualized my feelings and my understanding of my father's disease, but that they were doing the same work too, and that it was work that we were all endeavored in as a team, as a family, and as three people in my case, who were going through something that was united.
My name is Chelsea and I'm 30 years old. My dad was diagnosed with cancer when I was 4 years old. Thankfully, he's a survivor, and he was able to, the cancer, he was able to beat it, but there were still things that lingered on into the rest of his life and my family's life, that kind of the root cause was the cancer. And so my experience with that was, for example, my mother, she and my father couldn't have any more kids because of all the chemo and radiation that he underwent, made it so that he wasn't able to have any more kids. And for several years, he would go in and get tested and see if he could. And there was a fertility issue. And so every year I would talk to my mom, and she'd be very sad, but it was an open communication, and we kind of all got through it as a family. As I got older, there was always Cancer Survivors Day, which is something I fondly look back on. We would go every year, and my dad was very involved, and I got involved, and it became this, celebration of life, and something good that could come out of it is supporting others and dealing with and helping them get through what they're going through. As I got older, I remember vividly that I had a friend that her dad was diagnosed with cancer, and we were about 17, 18. So this has been years since my dad had been through what he had been through, but unfortunately her father passed away from it. I just remember dealing with the feeling of why, like, her dad was a good guy, my dad was a good guy, why him? Why did my dad get to live and her dad not? And again, I went back to my parents and I talked to them about it, and they were able to just listen and be, and just talk to me and be open and not try to make sense of everything all the time, but just be there for me. And so I still struggle with the why this person, why not that person, but I'm grateful to have a family that's willing to discuss it with me. When I say family, it's not just my mom and dad, it was my aunts and uncles and cousins and family, friends, and everybody. It was just a really great support system there, but it was all based on open and honest discussions about things. I'm so glad that I had that. Dealing with all of the adversity and challenges that came along with my dad having cancer, because it affected the whole family, it really did kind of toughen me up to deal with other things in life as I grew older. Just really reminded me to be grateful for what I had, and that some people have it way worse. And I just looked at challenges in my own life with a different viewpoint, I guess. He got through so much. I mean, really, he wasn't supposed to make it, and his will to live is possibly what got him through. And I just remember all the time, I keep that in the back of my head. And it's important to look at issues that arise in your own life and remember that it's not always so huge, and you can get through things. And of course, I wish he never had cancer, but since he did, there's silver linings and there's good things that came out of it. And one of those is just how I can face adversity today.
My name is Hunter. I'm 24 years old. My dad was diagnosed with melanoma cancer when I was 4.5 years old. I think that from that experience, what I really kind of most want to share is just the fact that it's a part of who I am, but it's not who I am. I wanted to complain. I wanted to be mad. I wanted to be sad. But looking up to my dad, he never. I didn't really ever hear him complain ever. He didn't whine and complain. Didn't make excuses. He woke up every day and lived his life to the fullest. On the weekends or during the summer when parents were going to California for treatment, or Omaha, or had just a bunch of appointments, or if it was going to be a rough week of chemo, then they were pretty good about having us around at the right times, but also letting us know that we have a lot of family that they want to be there for us. Me personally, being the oldest child, I never felt forced into being like a father figure in this instance, but just a parental figure. I always knew I had to lead by example, and that my brothers were looking up to me, but they were always looking up to me as an older brother and not as a father figure, because we had uncles that were still taking us on hunting trips and fishing and skiing and just all those just really fun things that my dad enjoyed. They kind of shouldered that burden. It's a learning experience as a child going through this, especially an older sibling with two younger brothers. Was you are going to be really resilient, and you're going to come through on the other side, but it doesn't always mean that that road is going to be pretty along the way. And I think just being there firsthand as a kid, that's what I would just implore any and all parents to do with their kids. And I know my parents really made an individual experience for each one of my brothers. Don't get me wrong, we weren't at every single appointment, and we weren't there right when the news broke. We weren't there at some of the worst times, but we were always usually within an earshot, or they weren't scared to tell us. It just happens that life kind of threw us a little bit of an oddball card, and we could wake up every day and complain and whine and make excuses for the cruddy hand. But I know that I wake up every day grateful to be alive, grateful to have an impact and carry on my father's legacy.
Hi, my name is Nancy, and I'm 27 years old. My grandmother was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 6 years old. Something I remember from that experience was having it explained to me that she was going to lose her hair, and that in order to get better, she had to lose her hair, and that was part of the process. And so I remember feeling very important that I got to go with her to help pick out her wig. Then when she did lose her hair, she was terrified that I would be scared of her when I saw her without her wig. But when I did the first time, I knew what to expect because it had been explained to me. So it wasn't shocking or anything. And so I think that helped for sure. And then I thought that if I gave her a scalp massage, it would help her hair grow back. I don't know that that helped at all, but she loved those massages. I am glad that my parents told me about what to expect when going to doctor's appointments and everything. Being in a medical setting, it didn't freak me out. It was just explained that, you know, this was what she needed to do in order to get well. And so it wasn't really a scary thing for me. It was not a negative experience because I knew what to expect. And even now, I think that that helped me be more comfortable in medical settings. I volunteered at a hospital throughout high school, and I just think being around that when I was young and not thinking of it as a bad thing, but a good thing. You know, doctors were kind of magical people that were going to make my Nana well again. I also remember days when she didn't feel great, and on those days, I would sit with her and we would read Winnie the Pooh, and I loved feeling like I could do something to lift her spirits, and that was great. And I knew that she was going to have some not so good days because that was explained to me. And again, I think having everything explained to me helped so much because I didn't think that I had done something. I knew that it was just part of the process. I had a workbook that I would do. It was my very own, and my mom would help me fill it out. And that was great, to be able to sort of express myself and have something, an outlet. And, being 6 years old, there was a question that was, what am I most scared about? And I believe I filled in that it was sharks. So not everything, at that age is all about the disease. There's still, you're still a kid.
And that is just the last slide of the presentation. And of course, you'll have that, but that hits on all the main things that we've talked about. And I guess I just, I really just want to thank you for sharing this time with me and allowing me to share my thoughts on this subject that matters a lot to me, helping children and teens cope with a serious illness of someone they love. And I'm sorry I went over.
That's okay, Pam. It's a lot of good information. So yeah, we're gonna quickly, I'm gonna have Emma come on and share just who the 4 lucky winners are. So what we'll do is we'll announce those names, and then either myself or Emma, she's our program assistant, will connect with you this week. Pam has authored a children's book as well as a teen workbook. And so we're gonna give away a few copies of those to some attendees today. So Emma, you wanna share who's the lucky winners?
Yes, I was looking at the participants. I'm just checking to make sure that they're all still here. I think they are, but.
And if if anybody that won had to hop off, we can connect with them afterwards too, but yeah, go ahead.
All right, so the names that I drew are gonna be Michelle, Velika, and I apologize if I mispronounce any names. Michelle, Velika, Kim, and Heather.
Perfect.
So congratulations to the winners. Either Kelly and I will email you about which version of that book you want.
And
Yeah,
address. And I'll get those out this week.
perfect. Thanks so much, Pam. And I did get a question here in the chat, and what I'll do, because there's a couple of resources that folks have asked about too, I'll connect with Pam after our event this week, and we'll go ahead and follow up with you guys in an email with some additional resources. So sorry that we didn't get to that last question, but for sake of time and out of respect for our presenter and those that are attending, we're going to go ahead and close right now, but I will follow up this week. If there are additional questions that you guys have that you would like to, submit to me offline, feel free to do so, and we'll connect with you to get those questions answered. But in the meantime, thanks for joining us today, and thank you for taking time out of your Saturday. And thanks, Pam. Thank you so much for the information.
You are very welcome. Thank you so much for asking me.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks so much, Kelly.
Bye now.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Bye. Have a good day.